"30 news polls. 30 news polls. 30 news polls." John Monash returned from executing the Battle of Amiens in World War I to revolutionise the state of Victoria. He was considered one of the best generals the Allied forces had, and as an engineer and a public servant post-war, was the primary driving force behind the State Electricity Commission's development of Victoria's vast brown coal reserves, making our humble state wealthier, more productive, and energy independent for decades to come. Now, Monash was a Victorian, and Victoria's never been a particularly conservative state, like, somewhat ironically, Queensland. When Victoria was known as the jewel in the Liberal crown, Liberal actually meant Liberal, not populist conservative, which goes some way to explaining why the Liberal Party of recent years has undeniably struggled here. We've named almost everything after Sir John. Our university, our alleys and streets, our city councils, and even our M1 freeway. So if you want to use his name to market a political product, you damn well better have the spirit of Victoria in mind. His legacy in the southern state is a treasure far exceeding any metaphorical royal headwear. And it's on the coattails of this legacy that the self-appointed conservative standard-bearing politicians hope to hitch their wooden-wheeled buggies. These bastions of economic responsibility, namely Eric Abetz from that conservative fortress of Tasmania, Kevin Andrews, who somewhat inexplicably holds the Victorian seat of Menzies, and it goes without saying, Tone's own Abbott of Sydney's wealthy north, have commandeered the name of a genuine Australian, nay Victorian, innovator and war hero to push the idea of a government-built coal power plant on Victoria's now inactive Hazelwood site. Which is all fine and dandy, right? Because if Monash supported the use of coal as a genuinely innovative solution to emerging energy needs in 1920, it's entirely appropriate to use his name to give some morsels of credibility to a wholly incredible plan some bitter backbenchers see as a way to force policy differentiation with Labor nearly 100 years later, right? Let's for a moment ignore the fact that its timing and three prominent public faces are so clearly and cynically designed to put pressure on their own leader as the Liberal and National Party coalition receives its magic 30th polling loss. Now, I understand the desire for retribution from Conservative forces in the Liberal Party. After all, they've only been the dominant faction in the broad church for the entirety of their years in government, with the possible exception of Malcolm Fraser, who only really let his socially liberal hair down towards the end of his life. The family of Sir John have very publicly asked them to withdraw the use of his name, but these guys are trying to make the Liberals look different to Labor, which I think you'll agree is a loftily selfless aspiration. So, whatever. Let's instead focus on the fact that this group of Liberals, or if you're one of those trendy arts and law students who reads The Guardian and capitalises the first four letters of the word coalition, the Liberals, and specifically conservative Liberals, wants the government to interfere in a market they privatised in a manner that would increase Australian emissions almost spitefully. These members of the Free Market Party want to spend $4 billion in public funds, not on some critical new road or rail corridor, not on an energy solution that's actually new and risky and, dare I say, fit for the modern age, like nuclear, thorium salts, or even pumped hydroelectric storage, but on a coal power plant. Thankfully, the idea has been slapped down by just about everyone in the government with any access to the levers of power, Conservative and Liberal alike, as it should. In Monash's time, the notion of a coal-powered generator to bring cheap electricity to the masses might indeed have been considered progressive, but this is 2018. Monash was born in the 19th century, when electricity was still a public policy flight of fancy. If Abbott and his cronies were really about sticking their neck out for the sake of the country, they'd be touting a new or previously undeveloped technology. Because if you're going to pick winners with other people's money, you certainly don't pick last century's winners. Now, all of this is to say nothing of the ethical arguments for and against spending the nation's financial and political capital in an attempt to combat the possibility of climate change rather than adapt to its effects. That's a debate for another episode, and frankly one that's far too nuanced for a man whose greatest political achievements are slaying enemies and soundbite slogans. It also says nothing of the fact that current spot prices for wholesale coal-fired electricity would almost double by the time any new high-efficiency, low-emission power plant comes online. And that's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the Minerals Council of Australia, and Conservative Treasurer Scott Morrison. So, the independent and the not-so-independent analysis clearly shows any new coal power plant won't be the messiah of cheap energy these politically dilapidated lunatics believe it to be. How is it that these people became standard bearers for conservative ideology when A, they're clearly willing to piss away public funds on their own pet projects, and B, so much of their agitation in recent times appears to be about opposing for opposition's sake, or, as the great man Tony would put it, giving our people something to fight for. True conservatives might be a little concerned with the idea of, raising taxes on free enterprise by 1.7% at a cost of more than $4.5 billion a year on a parental leave scheme that isn't even means tested. They would care more about the strength of our families than about appearing PC by default from supporting gay marriage. And smart conservatives would notice the fact that their ideas, at least as presented to the country through the prism of Parliament, are manifestly failing to appeal to anyone younger than baby boomers. You'd think that they would want their party and their ideology to grow and prosper, and would thus recognise the sheer idiocy of limiting their own appeal to a diminishing slice of the demographic for such small short-term gains. Folks, Tony Abbott is by any measure not a conservative, and he's about the furthest thing from Sir John Monash that our current Parliament could possibly produce. Sure, he's Catholic, but he's Democratic Labor Party Catholic, not mainstream slightly conservative Catholic. And the only risks he's ever taken are born of his own political tin ear, or rudely on behalf of everyone else in his party, the party that's kept him in paid work virtually his entire adult life. He's risking the party's current leadership because he's upset that a knighthood for the Queen's husband didn't play well on Australia Day. Shock. He's risking the entire notion of a Liberal government because he'd rather have control of the ashes than see a progressive Liberal who personally slighted him as the party's leader. But most importantly, he's risking our entire nation's prosperity and reputation with his ridiculous cult-like obsession with coal. He had his chance to turn Australia into a selfish pariah on energy when he was Prime Minister. Do you know what he did? He used his time to sign up to the Paris Accords and then break almost every sloganistic promise he'd made during the 2013 election campaign. From the Gonski education unity ticket right through to no new taxes. He was, without a doubt, the worst Prime Minister the Liberal Party's ever produced, regardless of how impressive he was in opposition, or how uninspiring Malcolm Turnbull has turned out to be. So in the words of the age's Amanda Vanstone, you can have the belligerent bully or the strong and civilised leader. Just remember that in 99.9999% of cases, and this is scientific fact, governments lose elections. Oppositions don't win them. It's exactly what the Labor government did for Tony Abbott, and it's exactly what Tony Abbott is doing for the Liberal government. Malcolm Turnbull remains Australia's preferred Prime Minister in a variety of polls over anyone else from either side of the aisle. But all these quote-unquote conservatives can see is a two-party preferred political competition that seemingly can only be won by constantly insulting those lazy, smartphone-addicted young people with their YouTubes and their MySpace books. Even The Guardian acknowledges that there's a solid core of next-generation Liberal MPs waiting in the wings who don't think anything like Tony Abbott. identifying with a far more liberal brand of conservative. MPs like Tim Wilson and James Paterson, who've been floating along between Malcolm and Tony factions, but staying quiet when they disagree. And that, friends, is why the Liberal Party is dying. Not because the moderates in the party are spending too much on health and education, or are too accepting of PC causes like being gay, but nor is it because conservative ideas no longer have any appeal. It's the particular brand of conservatism the coalition chooses to represent. The kind that's really just rank populism in a mask. The kind of populism that appeals for the grey vote but throws the youth vote under the bus in doing so because of a grossly misguided idea that all young people are leftists obsessed with identity politics that would never vote for them anyway. Way to lose a growing demographic of voters for a lifetime, Liberals. What a killer strategy. So as long as people like Tony Abbott remain in a position of influence over policy, the Liberals are doomed to death by attrition. And Sir John Monash would be spinning in his grave.